Hi everyone, in this video I'll be making this monitor riser that also doubles as keyboard storage. I began this build by cutting this piece of wood down to size so that I would have enough for the legs and the top. I then ripped all the pieces down to width and then moved on to cutting the legs down to height. The overall width ended up being about 7¼ inches while the height ended up being about 4½ inches. Next, I used my router with a 1/2 inch straight cut bit to route out room for the legs. I left the right side a little bit long so that I could trim it down to final length with a flush cut bit. Next, I added the legs on the right side in the middle but left the left one off so that I could add room for a USB port. I used a little bit of blue tape so that it would prevent the squeeze out of the glue from going onto the wood, and it just makes cleanup a little bit easier. I used 2 longer clamps to kind of pull it to the side so that it would be square in the end. I traced out the outline of a USB hub and then used the 1/2 inch straight cut bit to cut out the majority of it, and then for the wire pass through I used a 1/4 inch straight cut bit. I was using the plunge base for this part because it has a really nice depth gauge, and I was using that to adjust the depth so that everything would fit well. It was really finicky, but in the end it turned out well, and I'm not dissatisfied with it. After routing out the space for the USB hub, I was then able to glue in the left leg, and you can see that overhang that I was talking about earlier. I then clamped a piece of wood on the back of the project so that I could have a little bit more of a guide for the router to go along, and then used a rabbiting bit to ride along the back side of the monitor stand. This was so I could later install a piece of plywood to kind of close up the back of it. I then used a mini combination square to mark out the right angles that I needed to finish up with the chisel. Finally, I reinstalled the dado bit and made sure that the middle leg would be the same depth as the rabbited sections. Next, I used the flush trim bit to make sure that the edges were smooth and that I could clean up all the glue squeeze out. I then cut down a piece of plywood to rough dimensions and then installed a featherboard so I could cut it down to final size. And it fit pretty well, so I was satisfied. I tried to cut out a cool design that had rounded edges, but apparently my jigsaw skills aren't that great, so they were not even at all, and then I ended up just making square edges. I then used the jigsaw to continue to notch out a hole for the USB port, and then I applied a coat of white primer to the entire surface, but I only showed you a little bit so you wouldn't get bored. With the inside primed, I could then install the backer piece. I made sure to put ample clamps on it so that it would get nice and secured. I then started cutting out a plate that would assist in mounting the monitor stand to the base of the monitor riser. This allows for the pieces to just line up well and not have that large of a gap in between them. With a Forstner bit, I started drilling out a recess for a T-nut, and then I finished the hole with the correct size drill bit. I believe it was 7/16. I then drilled into the monitor riser with the same drill bit so that the bolts could go all the way into it and not have any issues. I then used a much smaller drill bit after installing the T-nut to give clearance for the teeth to go in, and then I applied some epoxy to the hole and then used a clamp to just push it all the way in. And then I drilled in to the monitor stand so I could screw in the plate to the back of it. All of these screws went into the solid wood of the top and of the middle leg. Next, I had to modify the monitor clamp that came with the system, and I just drilled out one of the threaded holes so that I could pass the bolt through easily. I epoxied the USB hub to the monitor stand and then used a paint key to help me make sure that it was perfectly flush with the front. I then clamped it into place and let that dry. So since the lighting in my office isn't that great, I figured I would just show you down here how I'm going to assemble this upstairs. And when I first got this monitor stand, I took the two pieces that were included, and you just take these little bolts and you thread them through the back holes of the stand into the holes that are threaded on the clamp, and that lets you clamp it with this onto your desk surface. But now I'm going to set this on my desk. I'm going to use a new bolt to thread through. I drilled out the hole that was right here, and that's going to thread through into the T-nut. And then once that's clamped to the desk, I'm going to attach this part to the top. And then there are two T-nuts that are designated for the monitor stand, just like this. I'm also going to be adding these little black things that I got on Amazon for cable management, and there is double-sided sticky tape on the bottom. I'm just going to put them probably like one right here and one right here, and that'll just make it so I can collect the wires as they're going up and hopefully try to hide the wiring a little bit better. And then I'm also going to be adding some of these little rubber feet things that you can get on Amazon as well, or any hardware store. And I'm just going to add them along the bottoms. So I added some of this like plastic cable wrap around the plywood cutout I made for the wires of one of my keyboards, and that is to reduce the drag or friction that might be caused by the wires rubbing up against the plywood. It's not necessary, but since one, I can't cut straight with the jigsaw, and two, I don't want wires to be rubbing the paint or finish off, and three, I just don't want to damage my wires. It's just kind of like a little bit of added protection for the long term, but it probably isn't necessary if you do a better job finishing your surface. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any comments or questions, please let me know in the description down below. Have a good one.